Today's speaker is Cindy Gelormini. She and her husband are longtime residents of New Providence, where they've raised their 4 children. Today, Cindy will speak about how their lives evolved while caring for their son, Robbie, with autism. As an advocate supporting other families with autism, Cindy developed an online podcast, a YouTube channel, on which she has created a library of interviews with other folks on the subject of autism. As a talented artist and writer, Cindy has authored and illustrated books for young school-age children intended to give them an understanding of children with autism. This week, coincidentally, Cindy will be honored for her autism advocacy work at the 10th Annual Boy Scouts Award reception as one of this year's 5 top outstanding residents of New Providence. Cindy, the microphone is yours.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Since I am an artist and I'm very visual, I'm a visual storyteller, so I have a PowerPoint that I'm gonna just flip through photos because I think it tells a better story. And I'm gonna tell you about Robbie. And usually I'm talking to children in school and I ask them, has anyone ever heard the word autism before? Raise your hand. Autism, when my son was diagnosed, it was 1 in 10,000 children were being diagnosed. It was almost unheard of. Now it's 1 in 50 children. And in the state of New Jersey, it's 1 in 32. We have the highest rate of autism in the entire country. So it's a pretty relevant subject now. It wasn't originally when my son was diagnosed, but it is now. So let me turn on my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let me make it the screen. Hold on. There we go. Okay, now you see him?
Yes.
Okay, so that's my son, Robbie. He was born in 1989. And as I said, only 1 in 10,000 kids were being diagnosed with autism. We didn't really, the only thing I had ever heard of autism was in the 80s, I used to watch the show St. Elsewhere about the doctors, and one of the doctor's sons had autism on the show. And that's really all that I knew. There was no internet back then. There was no way to research. And this picture was taken when I had twin girls that were 4.5 years older than him. And he sat down to watch a Disney movie with them on a VHS tape of, this was The Little Mermaid. And this was the first time he watched it, and we had no idea what we were in for. He was going to, after this, watch it over and over and over and over and over and over again. He had a couple of ear infections, and we thought that he couldn't really hear us because he wouldn't respond to his name. Sometimes he acted like he could hear us, and sometimes he couldn't. So we had tubes put in his ears and took him to speech therapy, and that's really what we thought was going on with him at the time. And my daughters had also had ear infections too, so I really thought nothing of it. Robbie loved the water. I always say if he could live in the water, he would. This is him playing, and I picked certain pictures for a reason because they'll come back later. But Robbie had sort of an odd way of playing. My girls went to Saltbrook School at the time, and I remember being out in the parking lot on a day after it rained, waiting for them, and he would go over to a puddle and he'd stick his head in the puddle, and then he'd stand up and look up to the sky and let the water drip down his face, and he would laugh like it was hysterical. And I thought, this kid he's kind of funny. He's different, but he's funny. And he would just do some strange, just odd things that were just different. But I thought it was because he was a boy, because I had only had girls before. So I thought, oh, well, boys are different. I guess he's stubborn. He doesn't like to come when I call his name. But that's really all that I thought it was. Here's Robbie starting to obsessively watch his videos. You can see he's going through the Disney selection here and choosing his videos. One of his favorite movies was Mary Poppins, and he loved watching the dancing penguins. It was about this time when he was about 2.5 years old I had taken my daughters to gymnastics, and one of the moms there was a speech therapist, and they asked, "How's Robbie doing?" And I said, this was in March, and I said, I don't think I've really heard him say anything since Christmas time. He would only talk if he was stressed, like when I dropped him off in the nursery at the gym. Most kids are going to cry for their mama, or when he wanted his baba. He just would say, had a couple of words where he would say bye bye, baba, mama. And I said, but I don't think I've heard him say anything in 3 months. And her eyebrows lifted and she's like, "Oh my God, you need to get him evaluated right away." And I took him to Overlook Hospital and had his hearing and speech evaluated. But they were not allowed to diagnose you as autistic yet. Here's the Mary Poppins with the penguins. That was one of his favorite things. So eventually what happened was I kept pressing my pediatrician, who kept telling him, "Oh, he's fine, don't worry. His sisters are spoiling him. My own brother didn't talk till he was 3 years old. He'll be fine." But I kept pressing him, and I took him to a developmental pediatrician down at Children's Specialized Hospital down in Mountainside, and he diagnosed him with autism. And as I said, I didn't even know what that was, and I had no way to even look it up. My only reference was a TV show. And that was it. So he recommended that Robbie go to the Developmental Learning Center in Chatham, which is also known as the Morris Union Jointure Commission. And that's where Robbie went. And here he is in school with his sisters on Sibling Day. And that school was specifically for autistic children. And that's when I began to learn what autism was. And his teachers, knew how to work with him, and they mostly worked on speech. Most autistic children, there's no blood test for it. There's no, the only way it's diagnosed is through behaviors. There's a list of 16 behaviors, and if you had 8 or less, you were diagnosed as having pervasive developmental disorder, PDD. That's what they said Robbie has at the time. But over time, he developed pretty much all the 16 symptoms. And it's basically, they have poor eye contact, poor social skills, some, lack of speech most of the time, no fear of danger. There's a whole list. And Robbie definitely had no fear of danger. He would run away. Many times we had the police after him, looking for him, because he would just take off and run, usually because he knew that the neighbors had a pool. He was running for the pool. But if he couldn't get into the pool because it was fenced off, he'd just keep running. So yeah, one of my stories that's in my children's books is 4th of July. We went to the fireworks when he was about 3. And just as the sun was going down and it was getting dark, we were all sitting on the blanket in the middle of the baseball field, and suddenly he was gone. We couldn't find him. And I immediately panicked. I thought he's either out in the street, hit by a car, dead, or he's in the brook, dead. I mean, just, terrified. I had to call the police to go find him, the police, the rescue squad, the fire department. And I suddenly found myself that parent that was describing my missing child and what he was wearing. And I told them, I said, "Listen, he doesn't talk. And if you call his name, he's not going to answer you." And listening to the police on his radio describing, "Be advised that the child will not speak," I almost passed out. Eventually, it probably was only 5 or 10 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. One of the people on the fire department found him on the football field, just twirling around and laughing and having a good old time. And he thought it was hilarious that he got all this attention. Everybody was out looking for him. He had no idea that he was even in danger. And that was just very typical. That was just the beginning of our journey. Autistic children do what is called stimming, where they stimulate themselves. They stimulate their in front of their eyes, and it can take many different forms. If you look at my daughter on the left, she's holding an old pair of shoes. Robbie used to take everybody's shoes and grab them by the laces, and he would twirl them around and spin them and spin them. And we were trying to get a photo of him, and he wouldn't look at the camera, so she took the shoes away from him. So instead, he's twirling his fingers. You'll notice one eye is closed. He just was the older he got, he was just constant motion, just couldn't sit still. And he would make vocalizations, but no words. He didn't really understand speech. He didn't really understand what you were saying, and he never learned how to talk. He lost the couple of words that he had at 2 years old, he lost and never spoke again. And he would just make, sounds like, huh, huh, huh. And he would just make up sounds. We learned, it's kind of like a baby, you learn what their different cries are. And I knew what his happy sounds were, what his aggravated sounds were, what his sad sounds were, things like that. So, and here you can see my fourth child is born now. There's David. So there's four of them. And as you can see, we were having a real good time that day. Yeah. A friend of mine had a house in Long Beach Island it was right on the beach. And again, I was afraid the whole time that I slept on the floor by the door because I was afraid that Robbie was going to get out and run to the ocean in the middle of the night and drown. So after this, I don't think we went to the beach for probably a good 10 years after that, because I was just too afraid he was going to run away. This is me painting a mural. So, how do you have a job when you have a child like that? I mean, I had worked in an office and I needed somebody to just pick him up from school and just watch him just for an hour in the afternoon, and all the babysitters would always quit. So I started my own business painting murals and faux finishes and things. I did that all throughout the 90s because I could make my own hours that way, and I could be home by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is Providence Barn Kitchen in New Providence. I painted that. This is the year of Sandy. I remember because the day I went back to sign it, I remember everybody standing out on South Street with their red gas cans waiting for gas because everybody had no power that day. This is Robbie jumping on the trampoline. He absolutely loved it. You'll notice that we have a fence in the backyard. First thing we did when we bought that house was fence it and gate it off. But occasionally people would, forget and leave the gate open and he'd get away. But the trampoline was good for him because he was constantly hyper, and it was like he always had constant adrenaline flowing through his body. So pressure would always make him feel better. And he loved to jump on the trampoline. And back in those days, you didn't put the netting around the trampoline. And he would jump about 5 feet in the air and he never fell off. It was one thing he was very skilled at. And he never really played with his siblings. He didn't play with other kids. He didn't understand. But if he would look out the window and he saw his sisters jumping on the trampoline, he would run outside and he would jump with them. And that was a one time where they would really get good eye contact out of him and some good interaction. So I just wanted to note that, with my other kids, the way you make other friends and meet other families is usually through your kids. So my younger son, David, he was an athlete. So he played baseball and basketball and football and soccer. And, you meet other parents on the soccer field. But since Robbie went to a school for autistic kids, I never met any other parents. I never knew any other parents. I never knew any, I didn't know his classmates really, unless I went into the school to drop off cupcakes or something. But Robbie never had a birthday party. He never got invited to friends' houses, and I never had anybody over here either, because honestly, I didn't want other autistic kids at my house. But they all were bused from all over New Jersey. There was no way to do that. It's not like you pick your kid up after school and bring kids over for a play date. It just didn't work that way. Kids were coming from an hour away. And I mention that just because I understand now what the life that other parents have, and it's kind of very isolating. Robbie used to break things, destroy things in my house all the time. He didn't really know his own strength. He would slam the doors. He slammed all the doors in my kitchen, and all the front drawers of my kitchen fell off. My doors all came off the hinges in the house. He would bang holes in the walls. And I work in the interior design field. So I'm in the most beautiful houses in Summit and Chatham and in Westfield, and then I would come home and my whole house was falling apart. So it could get kind of depressing. Robbie also was never potty trained. He wore a diaper into an adulthood. He would have a leaky diaper. It was just, you know, it's just a crazy life, and nobody understands it unless you've lived it. So here we are back at the beach. This is much later. Robbie's about 18 now, still loving the water, but he did start to calm down. I will tell you that kids with autism, when they hit puberty, it's just a horrendous time to go through. They become violent, especially if they can't speak. They're very frustrated because they can't communicate, and they feel that you don't understand them. But then when puberty hits, it just increases all that adrenaline in their bodies, and it just became really rough. He would go after my husband. He would, you know, attack my husband. He'd pull him to the floor, rip his shirt off. He'd grab all the cushions on my couch, throw them on the floor. He would purposely try to break something. And you can't, all the old-fashioned ways of disciplining and all that stuff goes right out the window because they don't understand. They just don't understand. They just don't get it. So the way they teach them in school is all with positive reinforcement. You know, spanking, time out, all that kind of stuff is just a waste of time. You're just going to make things worse and worse and worse. The way they teach them in school is, Robbie, do this, and then he would imitate it, and then they would reward him. When they're really little, when they're like 2-3 years old, they would reward him with like an M&M or something. And then as they get older, they would reward him with just a high five and, you know, and praise and things like that. So they start to learn what is good behavior and what is unacceptable behavior. You know, but when they're having a violent outburst, you know, or a meltdown, it doesn't work. There's really not much that you could do. But here, Robbie's past puberty, he's 18, he's starting to calm down, the running away starting to calm down a little bit. I learned that if I took a beach chair and put it right by the water, he loved it because he could just sit there and the waves would roll up and on his legs, and he would have fun. And on a good day, he could sit there for hours and do that. On a bad day, you know, we'd have to leave. But I learned to go straight up to the lifeguards and tell them, I said, take a good look at him, because if he decides that he wants to get up and run away, you're going to have to help me go find him. But luckily, we never needed that. That never happened. Here we are at an autism day at the bowling alley in Madison. They did teach Robbie in school. Since, you know, he didn't really understand speech and stuff, you can't teach him typical academics. He's never learned, you know, math or reading or any of that kind of thing. But they mostly worked on trying to give him ways to communicate, which was through picture exchange and sign language, working on his behaviors, trying to teach him basic life skills. Thankfully, they took them to the connection for swimming lessons, because I remember when Robbie was little, one of the boys in his school had drowned, and they planted a tree in his memory. And I think they learned early on that it's very important to teach them to swim. So they would take them to the connection for swimming lessons. Eventually, then they built a state-of-the-art school out in Warren that has 2 pools in it, where you know, swimming is just a big part of what they learn. And here's bowling. They took him to bowling, and they would give them a ramp so that they could put the bowling ball in the ramp, and it would, you know, roll down the ramp and down there. And the purpose of that was learning how to wait in line and take turns, because Robbie was extremely impatient. He expected things to be done within 2 seconds, and if it didn't, he'd throw himself on the floor and he'd, you know, have a meltdown. Which meant I could never take him anywhere. I couldn't take him to the store. You could, you know, God forbid there was a line or he had to wait. You know, he'd have a meltdown. So my husband and I, we used to split everything up. So I would go to the store and things while Robbie was in school. I never tried to take him out anywhere. My husband would take my girls to softball. I would take them to ballet. You know, we just split everything up. So we never went to things together. One of us always had to be with Robbie home. I tried taking Robbie to a softball game. It lasted about 5 minutes before he ran away into the woods. I said, that's it, we're going home. And I think it's mostly just because he didn't understand the game. He didn't understand what was going on. So it was just boring for him, and he just wanted to go home. And he always just wanted to be home watching Disney movies. That's all he ever wanted to do. Eventually I got a minivan that had a little mini TV that came out of the roof, and it had a VHS tape player, so I could play the Disney movies, so that we were able to go to the softball games, and I could sit in the car and let Robbie watch his movie in the back seat, and I could watch the game from the van. However, I made the mistake one day of walking away from the van for about 5 or 10 minutes, and when I came back, Robbie was upset, so he reached up and pulled out one of the round air conditioning vents, and then he got a hold of the fabric and he ripped all the fabric off of the roof of the interior of my car. That was fun. When Robbie was 17, he had his first seizure. It was a grand mal seizure. My husband was outside. Robbie was in the room that I'm sitting in actually right now was Robbie's TV room in my house. And my husband was outside and he heard this noise. And when he came in, it was Robbie's body banging against the wall, having a full-on seizure. And then he turned blue and stopped breathing. And I was not here. I sang on the worship team at the Presbyterian Church in the center of New Providence at the time. I was at a music rehearsal. And my daughter was home from college, and he ran in. My husband was on the fire department for many years. So I think he started doing CPR. My daughter had to call 911 to get the ambulance here. And my husband basically was, hitting his chest and yelling, Robbie, Robbie, come back, don't leave me. You can't do this, right? Come back. And Robbie, he just turned black, and the ambulance took him out. And my husband was getting ready to call me to come home to tell me that Robbie was gone. And all of a sudden, one of the EMS workers ran back to the house and knocked on the door, and they said, he's up. And he woke up in the ambulance and he sat up. So he was gone for about 15 minutes, but then he came back. And that began our journey with seizures. And about every 6 months, he would have a grand mal seizure. And if it lasted more than 1 minute, it was a 911 call, and he had to go to the emergency room. So I kind of had the system down and he would always just soak through his diaper and end up soaking wet when he was there. So I knew, bring an extra pair of clothes, bring a DVD player so I could play his movies, bring him a snack, because you sit in the emergency room for hours and hours. And he hated it, but he would always be really wiped out and tired. And then we would bring him home. So eventually what happened was, and here's Robbie in the hospital. This is where he went for his testing for the seizures. And you'll see here he is about 20 years old, and he's still watching Mary Poppins. The doctor, this is when I met the neurologist, and we were talking about how he would always be vomiting or having diarrhea every weekend, and all his stomach issues. And he had been vomiting all day before he had his seizure. And the neurologist asked me about his behaviors. And I said, well, they're coming in cycles of these violent behaviors. And then he'd calm down, and then he'd be the sweetest boy ever. And he said, are you seeing his stomach issues when you're seeing the violent behavior? And I said, actually, now that I think about it, maybe I do. And he said, keep a calendar of what's going on, because the violent behaviors could be coming because he didn't feel well, because he was having a bellyache. And he just couldn't communicate. That's usually, sometimes people think it's for no reason, but it is for a reason. They just can't tell you what's wrong. So I began to keep a calendar, and what happened was he every weekend he would have diarrhea. And, not to get too graphic, but if you've ever had a baby that gets diarrhea and it's all over their pajamas and their crib, imagine that with a 20-year-old young man. Okay. So that's what I was dealing with every weekend. And then on the holidays, he would vomit all night long. Every half hour, he'd just keep vomiting until nothing was coming out the green stomach bile. That's when he would stop, when there was just nothing left in his stomach. And no one could ever tell me what was going on. I called the doctor and they said, oh, well, it's a virus. I said, you don't get a virus every 6 weeks. So when I kept a calendar, I realized that he was getting sick on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, February vacation, April, Easter break. He had another seizure. He was back in the hospital, Memorial Day weekend. And then the day after school ended in June. And after 6 months of this, and the third time in the hospital in the ER, I finally realized he was getting sick every time he was off of school. And I realized he was putting 2 and 2 together, knowing that, oh no, it's a holiday. That means I'm not going to have school for a few days or a week. And it was upsetting his whole routine. And he liked being in school. He liked the structure. And that's when I finally called people to get some help. And I thought maybe I could get him into a residential school. There are places like that where autistic kids can actually live at their school and live there full time. But this was 2008 when the stock market dropped and nobody had any money and nobody was going to pay for anything. And so I got a big no on that. And then I called the state and they brought people to my home. They couldn't believe how severe he was. And they recommended that he go live in a group home. Then he could get around the care help. So we started the process of trying to get him in a group home. And he was you have to register with the state, with DDD, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and he was number 4,555 on the priority list. I've heard that number's up to about 8,000 now. And then I came to find out that the priority list is not the list. He has to be on the emergency list. So I had to figure out how to get him on the emergency list before I could get him in the group home, because there's just no openings anywhere. It's just too high of a need and not enough space. There's Robbie on his way to the hospital again. But eventually we did finally get him in to a place in Elizabeth, and it was awful. It was a disaster. They had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know how to take care of him at all. It was very frustrating, and I got tired of trying to explain to my friends and relatives what was going on. So eventually I just started turning on the camera on my phone, and I just started recording it and throwing it up on YouTube just so that I could share with friends and relatives what was going on with Robbie. And there's my YouTube channel. And we ended up getting followers from all over the world. I started hearing from families in, the Midwest. Oh, your son Robbie's just like my son. I thought we were the only ones. Someone from Brazil. Oh, Robbie's just like my brother. People from Australia, Germany, and just people from all over, just even the US. And they said, we don't have anything here. There's no school here for my son. I keep him home with me all day. There's no, there's no services from them. I was just, I couldn't believe, how much better we are here in New Jersey than in other places. But I would also hear from people that, oh, they just got a job having to work as an aide with autistic kids, and they didn't know anything about it and they were afraid. So they were researching and they Googled autism. They came across my website or my YouTube channel, and then they fell in love with Robbie and they said, now I'm excited. Now I want to go work with them. Now I know what to do. I heard from somebody that was in medical school, and after watching the videos, they said, now I know what field I want to go into. I want to go into neurology, all kinds of, wonderful things that happen through the YouTube channel. And this is what we filmed a lot of. Robbie loved to ride in the car, especially if he was having a bad day. We would just go for a ride in the car, and I'd turn the music on and roll the window down, and then he would start to smile. You could see his hands. He's stimming back there, but he's smiling. That's a happy stim, because he was in a happy mood there. So one of the lines in my book is, Robbie's a penguin who loves riding in the car. His mama always says, I love you just the way you are. And this was sort of the inspiration for it, because he loved riding in the car. And everyone that watched our YouTube videos knew how much Robbie loved to ride in the car. And they love to see him happy. So I got him into the group home, and since we moved him around to about 3 different ones, but they never had any training in working with people with autism. They only had worked with older older members that were maybe in their 50s that were in a wheelchair or kind of walked in slow motion, had different type of disabilities. It was not autism. And here you all of a sudden put this 20-year-old with all this energy running back and forth, who's frustrated because nobody understands him. So he'd pick up a chair, throw it across the room. So then they were afraid. Then they'd call the police. I showed up one time, they were taking my son out of the group home in handcuffs. And I said to the officer, I said, you do realize he has the mental capacity of a toddler, right? And he's like, no, I didn't know that. They were treating him like a man. And I said, do you have any training with autism? And he said, no, we don't. And I said, well, that's obvious. And then I had to shut my mouth because I didn't want to get in trouble. And I didn't want to end up in handcuffs myself. But I had to, just let the officer know, what he was dealing with. And they would take him off to the behavior health in the hospital, and then he'd come back home, then he'd go back in the group home. So when I started doing the YouTube channel, all the staff was mad at me. They hated me. And they called a meeting one day, and they called me, the people that don't, run the group home, and they said, we're aware of your meeting and the staff has seen it. We'd like to have a meeting. I was like, uh-oh. I said, all right, I'll come. And I thought they were going to kick Robbie out. And she started the meeting and she said, we know that all of you are aware of the fact that Mrs. Gelormini is doing YouTube channel. And there was silence in the room. And she said, well, I'm here to tell you that we screwed up. And I'm here to tell you that we thought that Robbie could just come in here and just, fit into our way of doing things. And that's not the case. People with autism are different. And we need to change the way we're doing things so that we can learn how to accommodate them. And I'm here to tell all of you, the staff, that from this point on, any new members that we get here to our homes are all going to be just like Robbie. They're all going to be young. They're all going to have autism. And we need to change the way we do things to accommodate people with autism. And if you don't like it, you can find other employment. And they all quit. So they brought in new staff. They brought in young men that could handle people like Robbie, and they changed their whole way of doing things after that because of Robbie. And after that, they have only been bringing in young guys like him, and they have changed the way everything's been done. So Robbie's a trailblazer. He's a pioneer. Anybody from New Providence knows we are the pioneers. Oh, this is just more of our videos of Robbie playing in the water, how he loved the water. And we used to visit him every Sunday. He ended up finally, they built a new home for him in Summit on Glendale Road, which is in North Summit, the nice section down there. And we used to visit him and just take him to do fun things every Sunday to visit him. He didn't really like us there. It was his world. It was his friends, his people, and we didn't belong in his it's kind of like a kid that goes off to college, they don't want their parents visiting. But I had to keep an eye on him and keep an eye on what was going on. Then finally here he's accepting an award for Resident of the Year. Finally, we had everything the way we wanted it. He graduated at 21. They ran a day program for him, and his school, he went to the Developmental Learning Center is in Hillview School on Central Avenue in New Providence. That's where he always went to school. That was his love. That's where he was happy. These days, most districts don't want to pay. It's very expensive to send a kid to school there. So they keep kids in districts. So half of the kids don't go there anymore. So they had a lot of empty space. So Robbie's day program now rented space in his old school. So now he was able to, and it was the same people that worked at his group home. The one that he was happy in was Our House, which is based out of New Providence. And Our House owned his group home in Summit, and they also run the day program out of Hillview School. So we finally had everything in place where Robbie got to spend the whole day at his school and then go home to his home where he lived. They had staff that he liked, and we finally had everything in place, and he was happy. And then on November 7th of 2017, 4 years ago, I got a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning that Robbie had a seizure. And he said, it's been 20 minutes, and he hung up the phone. And I said, how the hell could that be 20 minutes? A 1 minute seizure, he ends up in the hospital. So I grabbed my bag of all my things and I took off and I went to the hospital, and the ambulance was not there. And I didn't understand what was going on. And my husband came and he met me there. And as I said, was on the fire department. So he called and he said, can I talk to a police officer? And he walked away and he talked to him. And then he turned around and he hung up the phone and he said, Robbie's in heaven. And I was stunned. And the seizure didn't last 20 minutes. They had been doing CPR on him for 20 minutes. He had gotten up in the morning, he went to the bathroom, ran out to go see what the staff was doing, got back in his bed, and the staff went back 30 minutes later to go get him up for the day, and he was gone. After that happens, when you have a loss, you know, your friends and family come over to the house. And when they all came over to the house, someone had left and they went outside to my front lawn and they found this little penguin on my front lawn. And they came back and they knocked on the door and they said, were your little nieces here today to visit? And I said, no, they haven't been here, you know, in days. And they said, oh, well, we found this penguin. Maybe it's theirs. I said, I don't know. I didn't think anything of it. And I put it down on the table. A couple of days later, when my husband went back to work, he found this penguin paperweight sitting on his desk. He said, where did this penguin come from? And nobody knew. He didn't remember it ever being on his desk. Nobody ever remembered ever seeing it. But there it was. Then the day of Robbie's memorial service, my daughter had a dream that Robbie showed up at the front door wearing a tuxedo, and he looked great. He looked good, and he looked kind of like, this is Leo DiCaprio in a suit. And I had looked up, you know, I just Googled this photo because it made me think of Leo in Titanic when he was wearing this tuxedo. And when I Googled it, who knows another word for a tuxedo? They call it a penguin suit. And a penguin came up on Google. I said, what in the world is going on with penguins? And we just kept finding penguins and we just kept seeing penguins. It was just sort of odd. I was like, what is going on? Then we went, about 2 weeks later, I went to go clean out his room at his group home. And, you know, he was watching his Disney movies all the time. And I was just curious. I said, I'd like to see what was the last movie that what Robbie was watching, you know, before he went. And I went over to his DVD player and I hit the eject button. And this is the last movie he was watching. It was Happy Feet, about the dancing penguins. And I said, okay, something's going on here. I am definitely getting a message here. Robbie is sending me penguins. He is trying to tell me something about penguins. Obviously, he really likes them. I didn't realize he liked them as much as he did, but apparently he did. So there was definitely something to the penguins. I had this necklace made. Robbie's ashes are in that necklace. I took that picture down in Naples, Florida. We went away after that. We went away. We visit relatives down there for New Year's. And I took that picture there. And I just to say Robbie's on the beach with me today, you know. And I had it made, that particular one made because it looks like the water. And about a year and a half later, I was at a conference all day. During lunch, I had to go run to Home Depot and Target and stuff down on Route 22 in Union because I had a job the next day. I had to stage a house that was for sale and I needed to buy some pillows and a couple things. And then I got home around 11:30 at night and I went to take the necklace off and it was gone. And I panicked. I said, oh no, where was I today? And I retraced my steps. Oh my God, I was at Home Depot and Target. Those are the worst places. I'm never going to see this necklace ever again. So I posted on Facebook quickly because I'm a member of town pages. So I posted Summit, New Providence, Berkeley Heights, Westfield, Cranford. I said, I posted this picture and I said, listen, if anybody sees this necklace, I lost it today. If you're in those stores and you see it, please let me know. To you, it's a pretty piece of glass, but to me, it's priceless because it contains my son's ashes. And I went to bed and I woke up and it went viral. Hundreds of thousands of times it had been shared. I was like, whoa. So I was in real estate at that time. So now it was a Sunday. So I did an open house. And at 4 o'clock, I checked my emails and I got an email from this guy who says, hey, Cindy, I think I found your necklace. And I was like, I was very skeptical. I said, yeah, right. I'm like, this guy just wants to get me alone somewhere, you know, whatever. But at the time there was a realtor that had, you know, gotten murdered in Texas. And so all realtors were very, you know, nervous about anybody trying to get them alone anywhere. So I was a bit skeptical, but I called him and he said, no, I was at Home Depot. I saw it. Somebody had shown me your post. He says, I'm sorry to tell you it's broken in 4 pieces, but I do have it. Do you want it? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I want it. So my husband and I, we went and met him down on 22 and here he is, there's Vinny and there's the broken necklace. He was adorable. He's this cute Italian kid from Nutley. And he says, yeah, I'm really good at finding stuff. And he did, he found it. And I said, can I just take your picture so I could share on social media and all these people that were looking for the necklace? I just wanted to let them know that it was found. So again, that post went viral, shared hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. So then this young, pretty reporter lives in Milburn. She saw the post. She called me up. She says, hey, will you do a story on the news? And I said, sure. And we called Vinny and he came down and we did the interview there. And he's terrified of being on camera. He looks like a deer in the headlights. But it was very sweet of him to do that news interview for us about the story. And it was on the radio. Here I am on CBS News that night. They picked up the story. It was on the radio. It was on Z100. It was on everybody kept telling me, hey, we heard your story on the radio. And then the problem I had, though, that it was broken. So a friend of mine, she makes jewelry and she called me up and she said, hey, I melt glass in a kiln. I can fix it for you. So there it is. She got this mold and she put it back in there and she put it together. And then the Star Ledger had called me and he wanted to do the story on us also fixing the necklace. So he brought a videographer and they followed us for this entire day. They came and he filmed us putting it in the kiln. Then we came back to my house and he did a story on me and talking about Robbie. And then we went back when we took it out of the kiln, when it's all repaired, and they did this beautiful, just beautiful life tribute video of Robbie. It's hard for me to watch, actually, because it's very emotional. And then my birthday was about 3 weeks later. It was my birthday. I thought we were done with all of this. And I started getting texts at like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, who's texting me this early in the morning? I'm not a morning person. And my friend said, you're on the front page of the Sunday Star Ledger. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And she sent me this. So he purposely saved the story for my birthday, which was March 31st. But it was, again, it was just sort of like Robbie there saying, happy birthday, Mom. And there's that story. About a year later, I decided to write my children's book about a little penguin with autism, about Robbie. And I took my sketch pad with me everywhere I went. I had a couple of long trips. I went out to LA, back to Florida again. I went to Israel. That was a bucket list trip, very long flight. So I would sketch. And that trip was the first week of March in 2020. And guess what happened while I was away in Israel? Yeah, COVID broke out. So when we came back, we had to quarantine for 14 days and not knowing we had to go into lockdown. So now I had plenty of time to work on my illustrations. So here, this is my girls, my twin girls as penguins. And I was the brownie leader. He ran away one day and there's a story about that, but because of copyright, I didn't want to call it Girl Scouts. And I don't know if anybody knows, but I looked it up. What do you call a group of penguins? A group of penguins is not a den, it's called a wattle. And I thought that was really cute. So they go to Wattle Scouts. And then here it is painted. And I ended up doing 340 illustrations by the time I was done. There were 12 stories, there's a dozen stories. And this just kind of shows you my process. This is all in, well, it's Zita's ice cream, but I made up my own little decoration of the pink floor, but everything that had the pink floor all got painted together in groups so that I didn't have to keep mixing my paint. Here's my groupings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7 books full of illustrations. I ended up having to get a drafting table. I had these marathon sessions of sitting at my table for like 12 hours. And I stood up one day and my hip locked up. I couldn't even stand up. But eventually, it all got done. And here are the books. I decided to put 4 chapters in each book. I didn't want 12 books. I thought that was too many. 1 book of 12 chapters is too big for kids. So there's 4 chapters in each book, and there's three books altogether. And here, I'll just show you some of the illustrations. There's Robbie at the pool with little swimmies on. I showed you that picture early on. There's jumping on the trampoline with his sisters. There he is at school at the DLC using his picture exchange communication system. There he is sitting in his chair at the beach. Bottom right, he's winning his award for Resident of the Year. And the rides in the car, and every chapter ends this way, where the mama says, "I love you just the way you are." At the end of every chapter, I do a mom's minute. I don't think I show this in here, but it's the actual photos of Robbie, and I explain, it's called Mom's Minute, and I explain to the adults what's actually going on in the book. I explain what stimming is. When they run away, it's called eloping, and teaching them about autism. But as I was doing the illustrations, a friend of mine that's a teacher said to me, "I can't wait to read these stories to my class." And that was my light bulb moment. I said, oh my goodness, these books could be used, since kids are kept in public schools now and they're not isolated like Robbie was in a different school. Public school kids have autistic kids in their school. And so if the teachers would just read these books to the kids, they would learn what autism is, what the behaviors are, and it'll teach them. And this way, they'll understand them and have some empathy and understanding for the kids. It's also good for parents that their kids were just diagnosed and they don't know, just like me in the place that I was in, I didn't know what autism was. I didn't know what I was, getting myself into. And I thought the parents could read these books. They could read them to siblings, to grandparents, aunts and uncles, caregivers, and everybody will learn about autism, but in a really cute, funny way. Now, I'm going to hold on a second. Okay, this is my vision board that I put together 3 years ago that I wanted to be on the Today Show. And I put myself there with Hoda. And in April 2nd was Autism Awareness Day, and it actually happened. They did a feature on me on the books, and I'm going to click out of here so that I can jump over to the video and you can.
It is Autism. And according to the CDC, approximately 1 in 54 children in the U.S. is diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. Cindy Gelormini knows firsthand the struggles of raising a severely autistic son. She's the mom of 4, and she's written a trilogy of children's books about what it's like to live with autism. Here's her story.
Gonna try to slash that. There's a huge spectrum of autism that people don't seem to understand. My son is at the bottom of the spectrum. In the beginning, I just thought that he was different because he was a boy and he was just stubborn and he didn't answer me when I called his name. I talked to a friend that was a speech therapist and I said, "What do you think?" And she was like, "Oh my God, you need to get evaluated right away."
Doctors diagnosed Robbie with autism at age 2.
He doesn't really understand speech, but he does funny things and he likes to try to get a reaction out of you. That's probably one of my favorite things about him. I think that not being able to communicate is one of the hardest parts of it, because you just want your kid to be happy and healthy. You're forever trying to figure out, what does my child need? What is he trying to say? What's going to go wrong today?
When Robbie turned 17, he started to develop seizures. Experts say this can happen to up to 25% of autistic kids.
We've spent too many times in the ER.
When Robbie turned 20, Cindy enrolled him in a residential group home so Robbie could get better care. 3 years later, she made a video blog that captured all of the joy and the challenges of raising a child with autism.
So many people were telling me that they knew nothing about autism and they were so glad to see these videos because they were learning so much.
On November 7th, 2017, Cindy's worst fear came true. Robbie passed away from a seizure in his sleep. He was 27 years old.
My husband, he just said to me, Robbie's in heaven, and I was shocked. I was just stunned, and I didn't want to believe it. I thought, well, how can I continue spreading autism awareness? What would be a way that I could tell Robbie's story? And I was in a writing workshop, and a friend just said to me, you should write a children's book about a little penguin with autism about your son. And I said, oh, that's really a cute idea.
She called the trilogy of children's books Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures.
Each book starts with Robbie is a penguin who loves riding in the car. His mama always says, I love you just the way you are. And every chapter ends with the mama always saying to him, I love you just the way you are. I have these different talents, where I sing and I write songs. And when I sat down and I wrote the first book, it all rhymed. It was easy. It was like writing a song. And then because I have a background of painting murals and things, I did all the illustrations as well. This uses everything that I've done over the past 40 years of my life have all come together in this one project. It was all the years of raising Robbie, all the years of painting murals, all the years of the singing and the writing the songs. It was like my whole life all came together in that one moment in this one project. I'm trying to really help the parents too. I've met a lot of parents that they're comparing their autistic kids to typical kids. And the key I've learned is to accepting who your kid is. I love you just the way you are. That was the answer for me. Just love Robbie just the way he is. And I did. I just loved him the way he was.
Boy, that is beautiful. You can find the book Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures on today.com/shop. And when we come.
Okay, that's that. And then while I've got the screen open here for video, I'll just skip over to this just to say, what I'm doing now is because I know what it's like to be the mom and how stressful it is to raise these kids. You're very isolated. You don't have friends. It's hard to, they don't sleep well. The kids a lot of times will be up all night. The moms are under a lot of stress. So a goal that I had was I wanted to do retreat weekends for moms. And I think it's really important that since they get depressed, I wanted to have a professional comedian there, and they don't take care of themselves. So I wanted to do some makeovers. I wanted to give them time just to get together, to meet each other and make new friends, and also to get massages for the stress. So I did a retreat day, I only did for one full day at the Murray Hill Inn, October 15th. 65 moms came. I pulled it together like in a month. I got a massage school to come up from Tom's River where they brought 10 massage therapist students that did massages on all the moms. I did a paint party. I sent them down the hall to actually Roger's daughter, Kelly, is a therapist. So I sent them down to Kelly and they all just got together to chat and talk. Then they went in, they made bracelets. I had Paolo's Kitchen in New Providence. Paolo has twins with autism. Paolo donated all the food for the day, lunch and dinner. Somebody else donated a cake for them for dessert. Other people donated wine. That was the big hit. The moms hit the wine at early, right after lunch. And then we did makeover reveals. We did it like a fashion show. We surprised for the moms. They went to the salon across the street. They did their hair and makeup. My sister's a photographer. She took photos of them. And then we came back and did a big reveal to the, with music playing and everything like a fashion show. And then we ended the night with a professional comedian that I found who also has a son with severe autism. He's a lot like my son. So it was a great, great, great day. Everybody loved it. And it was my test And since it went so well, I'm starting a foundation. It's called the Robbie's World Foundation. I'm just waiting for my attorney to just finish up the papers so I could sign the papers and get the ball rolling. And we're going to do more. I'm going to do one in Toms River in the spring. And the reason I chose Toms River is because they have the highest amount of autism in the entire state of New Jersey. And since New Jersey has the highest in the country, that means Toms River has the most autism in the entire country. So I want to go down there and do a retreat weekend for them there, and then another one again in the fall. And I just want to keep doing them. So that's one of the things I want to do with the foundation. And my huge goal is to build group homes and do it in the way that I think should be done, in the way that Robbie, you know, where Robbie would have liked to have lived. That's going to take millions of dollars. That's a big, huge thing. But for now, I'm starting with the retreat. So this video I'm going to show you is just this short video that we put together of the retreat day, just so you can see how that day went. This is a company that employs autistic people making those candles.
I tell you this story is I need to give you a point of reference for me and why you are like so important to me.
And the reason that is because his mom has Esquire at the end of her name and they're afraid of me. So I'm very much on top of everything with my son. Aiden is the light of my life. He is my world. And he's the only reason I get up in the morning to fight for him.
The service that we go to every month, the special needs service. But I realized I never asked you, what are your thoughts about God? And this is the conversation with Ethan typing his responses to my verbal questions. God is in my heart, and he will always protect me.
God bless each and every single one of you.
Treat you all like celebrities that day.
That day, this is what you're coming into our world to be treated. Thank you to Cindy for asking us to participate. We're so excited to be able to do this.
Okay.
Like one Tuesday a month, a little bit early, so that it's just me in the salon and we can give space to anyone who needs space and anyone with sensory issues, so that it's quiet and we can take our time and just make it as comfortable and as stress-free as possible for both the person getting their haircut and the caretaker.
I had parents, as I got older and life allowed me to have some influence, would call me and ask me and tell me about their children that had some sort of disability. And honestly, I didn't know what to say to parents that had a child with a disability, because I'm the child with a disability, and so I could help their kid, but I didn't know how to help parents. And so
another weird thing about autism, you can't always tell someone's autistic just by looking at them. Like with my son, you can't really tell, other than the fact that he really likes to be naked. We're at a store, he's like 11, he's having a full-on meltdown, and this guy got mad at me, he's like, hey, control your kid. And I was like, hey, be compassionate, he's autistic. Yeah, well, how am I supposed to know that? He's naked.
She's incredibly generous. I really, really love this woman. She owns the salon across the street, but she's just such a sweet, I mean, just the most generous heart. She really does. She always does things to help people. I told her about this idea 5 years ago, and she's like, absolutely, I'm in. So it took 5 years, and 5 years later, I'm like, remember that thing I told you?
There we go. Okay, we're back. Okay. So that's it. So that's my presentation.
Okay, Cindy, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation about your and Robbie's lives. And we've got a couple questions for you. John Tomaszewski, you're first, please. And you have to unmute.
Hi, I have to tell you, you're my new hero. It's amazing what you've done. I just wanted to say that I was teaching at Watchung High School, and what I could not believe was the kids who had autism. The other kids just treated them like they were special. And my question is, you said your son was on a spectrum. Is that like a thing, or you just kind of said that it's 5 and 6?
No, that's what they call it. They call it the autism spectrum, you know, because you'll have kids that they used to call it Asperger's, you know, they don't call it Asperger's now. But, you know, you'll have kids that can talk and have full conversations with you, have master's degrees even. It's more affects their social, you know, they're awkward socially and things like that, right? I guess it's your cognitive level can be, you know, different degrees. They develop very unevenly, like they could, you know, be very smart in one area and then they can't tie their shoes, you know. My son, though, he was on the low end all the way across the board. He really was like, he functioned. I always just told everybody, just think of a toddler and then you'll understand him. You still have to cut his food for him. You still have to wipe his butt. You got to shower him. You have to do everything that anything that you do with a 1.5-year-old, that's what you did with my son. But they're not all like that. You know, there's all varying, you know, like there's kids that are in school, in high school or whatever, you know, and they might be socially awkward, but, you know, and they might not do well in math, but do well in other things or whatever. They're all different.
Yeah, one of my favorite kids who was in the school, in a math class, she would finish the math before other kids got started. She was so good at this one thing, and it just, but, you know, but to walk through the hall or do other things, she had difficulty with.
Yeah, and it can affect their 5 senses too. I talk about all this stuff in the book, like their hearing can be hypersensitive, you know, so sounds really bother them. So they might wear, you know, headphones. You know, their sense of taste, you know, they can't handle certain textures when they eat. I think that my son used to do a lot of the stimming stuff to stimulate himself visually. I don't know what was going on in there, but he liked to see spinning things and stuff. They also usually are very OCD about something, you know, whatever they love. There was a boy that used to ride on his bus that was obsessed with cars, and he knew every make and model that everybody had. So I would walk onto the bus and he would always say, "Miss Cindy, Dodge Caravan." I was like, you're right. Miss Cindy has a Dodge Caravan. Like he knew, you know, and my daughter, I didn't say this, but my daughter, Patty, ended up teaching at Robbie's school. She became a special ed teacher. She worked at the DLC. And she had a student that was obsessed with reading and with letters. And you know how classrooms have the alphabet going around the room? Like he would get so distracted and constantly have to read the alphabet that she had to take it down because she couldn't get any work done. And now my son David now is also now working at that school as well. So we've carried on the family tradition.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Herb Waddell?
Yes, hi. Thank you for making us aware of a plague that is actually worse than COVID-19,
I agree.
because it strikes our most precious people. And it's year after year. You would think that a condition like this, being so bad for so many decades, would have been solved by now. And to that, I recall that about 10, 15 years ago, autism was popular because people thought it might be caused by the preservative in childhood vaccines. And in the parlance of today, I guess that was debunked. And has there been progress? Is it still 1 in 50, or has it gotten better? And is there any clue as to what causes it?
It's not getting better, it's getting worse progressively. And it's funny because I'm trying to get to the answer of that myself. I didn't mention, I do have a podcast where I've been interviewing parents. I started a year ago. And the very first interview that I did was with a mom who's also a special ed teacher. And she tells a story about how she took her son when he was about 1.5 years to go get I've trained myself to not say the V word, because if you say it on social media, they block you, you get censored. I actually lost all my social media because I said it.
That's another plague.
Yeah. So anyway, after that, he got very sick. He had 105-degree fever for 3 days. He was very sick. And when the fever broke and he wasn't sick anymore, she says, he was gone. Lost all eye contact. He started banging his head against the wall. He stopped speaking. But then she says, but of course it's been proven that vaccines don't cause autism. I was like, how could you even, I don't even understand how you could just tell that story and then finish it with that. And I don't know if she was being sarcastic or what. I will say that I've listened to Bobby Kennedy. I've listened to his stuff. It's very compelling. For me personally, when Robbie was born, his ears were a little bit scrunched up, and they tested his, I think his kidneys or the liver function at the same time. They develop at the same time as the ears. So they wanted to check inside, outside, and they said, no, he's okay. He also had a hypospadias, which means his pee-pee hole was down here and not up here, and he had to have surgery on that. So it was these couple little physical things. And then he crawled late and he walked late. And then all the ear infections and everything, that told me something didn't form correctly in the uterus. Okay, so I never bought into the vaccine thing for me. I know there's other parents that are convinced that that's what it is. And this is what I try to get at in my interviews. I ask all the moms, so tell me about the birth, your pregnancy, the birth, the development of the baby, and a lot of times they'll say they were fine until about 18 months, 2 years old, boom. Right. But that's also when certain parts of the brain are developing and language is developing and all of that. So I just interviewed a naturopathic doctor. He's more into finding the root cause of disease and treating that rather than just throwing medications at you. And I told him, I said, listen, when my mom was having kids, they didn't have autism like they do now. I'm looking back, I see there's kids I went to school with that probably were autistic, but they weren't diagnosing autism back then, right? But even still, there were only a handful, right? Now it's almost like everywhere I go, you see somebody with autism. So I said, as far as I'm concerned, something happened genetically in our bodies that my generation is now the ones giving birth to all these autistic kids. And if you look at it, what happened over the span, I was born in 1964. Okay. So I remember when we got our first microwave and McDonald's and TV dinners and all these plastics and and genetically modified food and all this stuff. The amount of vaccines that they give kids now is triple what they gave my daughters. And they pack them all in at once, you know, like why they don't space them out. The other thing is in 1989, the year my son was born was the year they started putting vaccines in mercury. So they were blaming the mercury, you know, but what I said to this doctor was, it seems to me, because 3 out of my 4 kids are fine and they all were vaccinated, but Robbie, why not? And I said, it seems to me that something was going on genetically inside him that predisposes these kids, that once the vaccine comes, it's triggering something in their body. And he went on to explain what a vaccine actually does. Vaccines actually trigger a response in your body, you know, where your body tries to attack diseases and things like that. And he was saying, you have to, I'm not a doctor, I can't explain it. You have to listen to him, but everybody has theories. It's all theories. So I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. All I know is that we went from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 32.
Oh, it's unbelievable that it gets so little recognition. Thanks again.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Solberg. Eric, you have to unmute.
Hi, I'm a testimonial to someone who knew Robbie as the most adorable child when he was a small kid. And I can attest to that. I was the principal of the school where Robbie came. Cindy has always been an innovator, someone who doesn't take no for an answer, who has changed individual people. She's motivated people to come into the field, as you've heard. And she's told you a lot about autism, which is a spectrum disease, which means there's a wide variety of causes and a wide variety of symptoms and behaviors. The field has come so far, but you just have to hand it to Cindy and her family and her adorable twins who came into the school on sibling day to really work with him. You have an example of a full court press by that family, which not only changed the staff that worked with him, but changed her school district, changed New Jersey. And as you can hear from her outreach and social media has affected so many people. And she doesn't stop. She is just somebody who, I mean, if you had that fire, you could just see the fire that she's in. And I just want to say that the field has come a long way. And people don't have to do generally, at least in New Jersey and most of the US, what Cindy had and her family had to go through. But we've still not got, we know what to do in many, many ways. But those methods haven't hit every classroom, and we still need parents and we need family members to help out, and we need communities and state education departments to fund programs and to monitor them so that they really hold a high degree of excellence that Robbie needed and all kids with autism need. So it's just a pleasure. I have not had contact with Cindy in years, so it's just a pleasure to see her and to hear her still be on the
I mean, you were there at the school in Chatham, no?
Correct. I was the first director of the Developmental Learning Center.
Yeah, you were the first person that we met. So I want you to know here, this chapter 4, I call it the Special Learning School, but it's the Developmental Learning Center. Okay. And this is when we went. This is when he's being evaluated. And this is when we go look at all different schools, and Robbie runs for the door because he hates every school. But this is the day that I met you. Because we took Robbie to come visit the school, and I'll never forget, he would run for the door and he hated every school. But when we got to the DLC, he found this toy and he took it off the shelf and he sat down and he started playing with the toy, and he was comfortable there. And I said, well, I guess he likes this place. And that's where he went. Yeah, and this talks about when he first went to school, and Miss Nina is driving the bus. And here. This is where he gets on the bus, and this is the boy that says, "Oh, Miss Cindy, Dodge Caravan." And then this is Mr. Glenn working on his self skills. Like the whole chapter is about the DLC. So I donated the books. I went and saw, I went down to the school and I saw Janet Fike, and I gave them several copies of the book. She said it's the most read book at the school.
Well, it's just a pleasure to hear all that you've done. And just to add on that, you know, if you think of a new student for the new teacher, if the kid has autism, the teacher doesn't lay down the law right away. The teacher wants to observe and find the individual aspects of this child and how he or she can approach them and what techniques can be effective. So, I mean, you guys have, I'm sure everyone in the audience has been touched by autism, but now you really have an individual story of that's almost 30, 25 years ago. Boy, it's just really a change. So thank you, Cindy, for what you've done today.
You're welcome. My goal, and this is my ask of the day. I would love to see these books in every elementary school in New Jersey. They're in a couple, you know, they're in New Providence. I had someone from Woodbridge who's on the Board of Ed with the town of Woodbridge bought several sets and put them in all the elementary schools in Woodbridge. But I don't know how to get them into all the schools. So if anybody has any kind of connections or any ideas for me, I'd love to know.
Paul, last question goes to you. Unmute.
Thanks. Oh, first, let me thank Eric for your remarks. Eric actually is our newest member, and he joined last week.
Perfect timing.
We hope to hear more from you, Eric, and thank you for joining Old Guard. Now, Cindy, I just want to give my personal thanks. You know, we spoke last week and everything, and I'm just delighted. It is such a moving story. It's such an inspirational story, and it's such a heartwarming story to see, you know, a mom who really does love her child and will, you know, does all of these things. I mean, so my thanks. Somebody else is going to thank you next, so thank you. Bye.
I guess that's my turn.
Your turn, Roger.
Cindy, I was going to call you the ever-ready bunny, but we love you just the way you are. I think that's your phrase. The Old Guard has a way of thanking our speakers, and we have a certificate, which you'll see on the screen with your name on it. You'll notice the orchid. Since you've lived near Summit, you may or may not know that the orchid was the Old Guard adopted the orchid as a symbol when it was founded in 1930, since Summit was the orchid capital of the country at that time. So we thank you with that, and we have another word also thanking you, which is the Old Guard salute.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Roger, thank you. And Cindy, thank you for sharing today an incredible and loving story. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.